and welcome to our first 2021 episode of Greenheart Connects. New year, new setup. I'm Marcel and I'll be your host. Thank you for being here. Greenheart Connects is a monthly online series where like-minded people gather and exchange ideas for caring for the earth and for each other. Through facilitated discussions and curated presentations, people from around the world share inspiring stories, tips, suggestions, and resources to improve local communities and the world. Greenheart Connects is brought to you by Greenheart International, a not-for-profit organization facilitating global understanding through cultural exchange programs for Americans and young people from around the world. Thank you for joining us today. Exchange has the power to broaden perspectives and to change lives. We think you will be inspired by what we have to share with you today. Greenheart Connects dives into several themes throughout the year: environmentalism, volunteerism, fair trade, and personal growth. Today, we're talking with a couple of young climate activists, Xiye Bastida and Joseph Wilkanowski. Xiye is a climate activist and one of the lead organizers of the Friday for Future Youth Climate Strike movement. She received the Spirit of the UN Award in 2018. Joseph focuses on racial justice within underprivileged communities, bridging global, intersectional, and intergenerational approaches to climate justice. Their stories and what they're doing to activate people through their group, Re-Earth Initiative, cross several of our themes. We think you will be inspired to hear what propelled Xiye and Joseph to get involved for climate action. After their presentation, we will meet back here for a live Q&A. So, are you ready? Let's go.
Hi everyone, my name is Xiye Bastida. I'm a climate activist. I'm originally from Mexico and I'm currently living in New York City. I'm part of the organization Re-Earth Initiative that we co-founded along with other activists, and this is Joseph.
Hi everyone, my name is Joseph. I'm also from New York City, originally from Colombia, but moved here much earlier than Xiye moved to New York City. And I started activism about a year ago, I would say, and I started it off in New York, but I think that we should both share stories of how we got into it and then as well as how it led to Re-Earth in the future, because that's what we're here for. So do you want to go?
Yeah, so I'll tell you all a little bit about my background and my story and how I got into activism, what really triggered me to step up. I always give the credit to my parents, really, because they have taught me most of the things that I know, and also they really led by example. They met in the first Earth Summit in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro when they were teenagers, and then they met again in another climate conference in Ecuador and then again in California. So they really went through a journey of just meeting in different conferences, advocating for climate justice, my dad advocating for indigenous rights, and that's how they ultimately ended up together. They moved to Mexico, where my dad is from, into our community that is called San Pedro Tultepec. I was born really close to there in one of the bigger cities next to there called Toluca, and they have been working for the past 20 years to clean the waste that's being dumped in our river for the past 2 decades. And I grew up with an indigenous cosmology. My parents taught me that our relationship with Mother Earth is reciprocal, that we need to, as we receive, we have to give. And one of the first things that I noticed as I was growing up is that the whole world did not think the way that I thought, that there was a lot of disconnect, that people were polluting and extracting and basically just disrespecting all our environment. And that's when I started to question why we were doing this. Why weren't we actually in touch with our very innate relationship with the world around us? And around the same time, when I was 13 years old, my hometown suffered from flooding. And that was something that showed me that the climate crisis was not happening in 50 years, in 100 years, that it was already materializing and that it was affecting frontline communities who were the least responsible for the crisis. And it showed me a lot of different things. One, communities who are the least prepared to deal with the climate crisis are often the hardest hit. They don't have the infrastructure or resources to deal with it. The second one is that the same companies who are creating this contamination and the cycle that perpetuates the climate crisis were situated in these communities and basically stealing our biocultural diversity and stealing our relationship with our ecosystems and damaging our biopsychosocial relationship with our communities. When I moved to New York City, I saw what Hurricane Sandy did. I saw the destruction that it left in Long Island. And that was another moment for me that showed me the global scope of the crisis. It's not happening in isolated places, in the poles where the ice is melting, or where fires are happening, or where flood is happening. It's really happening everywhere in different ways, affecting people in different depths. And that's when I decided that I needed to step up as a young person, that I couldn't wait to grow up and get a degree in sustainable development and then start speaking up. That as a generation that is really dealing with the decision of either continuing in our path to 7 degrees of warming or completely shifting to stabilizing to below 2 degrees of warming from pre-industrial levels, we couldn't wait to grow up. We just had to get into the work. And I started really small, joining my environmental club at my school, and it kind of grew bigger and bigger. I then started giving speeches, telling people about my background and my story and why it's so important for communities all around the world that we are more in touch with Mother Nature. Then I started organizing with Fridays for Future. I organized all the strikes that have happened in New York City, from the first ever in March 15th up to the last one that we had on December 6th. That was the last one we could have because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And in the middle was the September 20th climate strike that brought over 300,000 people to the streets. And we only prepared for 18,000 people, 18 to 20,000 people. So that was the best moment in my life because it showed me our power of solidarity, our power of actually being able to come together and address a crisis that seems big and complicated, but it actually has a lot of steps towards solutions and steps toward a regenerative future.
So that's going to be hard to follow up for sure. So
I think we should tell them
we went to high school together, so we became immediate friends in freshman year, I'd say. And I saw her start off in activism, and I knew that she was going to do so well. She's a great public speaker. She does perfect in every single sense, and that she was doing definitely waves within the climate range. And I don't have roots like she does within her family, so I was definitely seeing it as an outside, more of a sideline view. But I kind of started to notice it when I was growing up, and it was actually a late realization of what was actually happening. So when I moved into the professional world and I actually started working, I worked at an NYU Langone hospital, which is one of the biggest hospitals in New York City. I was there for guest services and emergency situations, and you saw that there was a huge effect of environmental impact to a lot of low-income neighborhoods that she was talking about. You really did see that there was a huge connection between global warming and all of these things that were happening. Air pollution, all of this, like lead poisoning is another huge thing. You have factories next to these low-income housing. And this was all starting to come at me in this sense of like, I had to use my power and privilege to speak for the ones I don't. Sometimes people don't realize it. I was very young and I didn't really understand what was happening around me. And I just thought these things were going to happen. I couldn't have any voice or any impact in any sense to actually stop these things. But when I saw other youth activists start to create these organizations and create these protests, I knew that I should get into it because anyone can start into it. I think we're definitely examples of that. And it kind of turns into this thing of this huge community that we're all used to within New York, and then that connects all around the world. All these activists you find start off with their own experience, however way that they find into it, through racial justice or any type of issue that they want to focus on. They're all interconnected and somehow related to each other. So I kind of started off differently than Xiye, but we both ended up in the same place with the realization of where you start and then how that kind of leads into other issues. And then finally goes into our organization, Re-Earth, which we started this year. So.
Yeah, and I just also want to point out that, Joseph started coming to the environmental club meetings because we were friends, not because I feel like we were still at a point where going to the environmental club meetings wasn't cool or it wasn't something that people wanted to do. And Joseph was one of the cool kids in the school, just so you guys know. So I wasn't. I was just like, with my smaller group of friends, and Joseph was like all the cool kids. And he would come to the environmental club meetings because he was supporting me, and I really appreciated that. But then I feel like there was also a point of breakthrough where he realized that it's not only her or other people who can do things, but it's also me. And I think that that's like one of the most important things to realize.
Yeah,
right?
No, 100%. I think that a lot of kids don't realize it, and especially when you're in high school and you become independent in a sense, you have to start realizing that these things are going to start affecting you in the future. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people started to realize that, especially when it comes to the election this year. That was another huge thing that we realized, where you could use political voice to impact environmental issues. And a lot of people are starting to realize that these issues are going to affect you and your children in the future. And when you become independent, you start realizing the impact that you have, as well as the life that you're trying to make, in a sense. You do realize that in some way these things are going to get in your way of whatever goal that you have, and then people start stepping up. But a lot of people are still not understanding and getting the severity of issues. So especially in high school and going into college, there were a few people who, of course, weren't interested, but we did our best with just trying to show that they were able to come whenever into the club. Xiye was very inviting, and the rest of the people were. And of course, Xiye brought tons of people to the club, just being the brilliant person that she was. So yeah, and that's also how she kind of dragged me in, not dragged me in, but encouraged me in
into
Re-Earth Initiative, which we are now co-founders of officially. So
I'll tell the story about how we started. So I was really, really involved in Fridays for Future NYC at, the beginning of the year, like pre-pandemic. I had been involved with Fridays for Future NYC since March of 2019. And we were so excited to plan our next strike, which was going to happen on Earth Day. So we were super excited to plan that. We wanted that to be even bigger than September 20th. And in New York City, the pandemic started to hit in early March, and schools shut down mid-March. And then, as we all remember, it was a really scary time for all of us. Everything had, school stopped, jobs stopped. Nobody would even go into the subway. And so it was really hard for the climate movement to decide what we needed to do, especially, as Joseph said, the election coming up. We wanted to have an impact, but we didn't know how we weren't able to bring people to the streets. And as activists who want other people to listen to the science, we needed to listen to the scientists who were telling us about COVID and how fast it can spread. So we made it a point from the very beginning of the pandemic to not strike. But that meant that, it put the question into our minds of what can we do from here. And it was like we had a period of time of reflection, really, a few weeks of reflection. And it was really special that the climate community was still there, because even if we can't strike, even if we can organize, we are still there for each other. And I think that's a very important thing that sometimes we don't talk about enough, we don't cherish enough. And so it was about March 20-something, and Vice got in contact with me. It's a media outlet. And they said, so I want to know what you are doing for Earth Day. And I had no idea what we were doing for Earth Day. So I decided that I wanted to make a campaign But because I couldn't actually do a campaign with people in my own community in New York City, because of the pandemic, I decided, or I could, online, but I decided, what if we make this a global campaign? What's preventing us from reaching out to all my activist friends around the world and saying, why don't we do something online for Earth Day? And so I reached out to friends in Chile and Costa Rica and Australia and Ireland, India, literally friends from all over the world who I've met at COPs or online. And actually, there's only 3 people from the US, Joseph, me, and our friend Ilana, who lives in Pennsylvania. But aside from us 3 from the US, everybody else from other parts of the world. So I brought all of them together into a WhatsApp group chat and said, guys, we need to do a campaign. Who's in? And everybody was super excited, to my surprise. And so we started creating graphics and our Instagram and our website and doing so many things. And our plan for Earth Day was to invite people to do an individual action and a systemic action pledge. Because we know that in the climate movement, there's this division of what's more important, individual actions or systemic change. And we think both of them are important, because if there's no individual drive, you can't create systemic change. If there aren't people who push individually for systemic change, it's not going to happen. And in turn, systemic change can influence individual actions. So we invited people to do that, and we got 300,000 people reach of people posting on Earth Day their pledges, and it was just amazing. And that was our first ever campaign. And when it ended, after the most amazing month of bonding, we decided that we wanted to keep going.
Hey guys!
This is the We the Planet team.
Thank you so much for joining our We the Planet Earth Day campaign yesterday. It was a huge success, and that's all thanks to your support.
Over 1,000 people joined us in making their individual and systemic climate pledges.
Over 15,000 people viewed and participated through the live interviews we had.
And a total of 300,000 people heard about our campaign.
We want to keep this momentum going.
We need to keep the climate conversation going.
But campaigns grow and evolve.
And this is our surprise.
We are going to transform from a campaign into an organization, which is why we are changing our name to the Re-Earth Initiative.
Because we want to reimagine what the future can look like.
We need to rebuild the future.
We need to reconnect
And rethink how we treat the Earth.
As an organization, we want to help you turn your pledges into action
and reimagine our future and our Earth.
Join us for the exciting journey of Re-Earth Initiative.
And we made it a point from the beginning to do everything as accessible as possible. So we translate everything into English and Spanish, all of our posts. But we also translate all of the toolkits that we make into up to 6 different languages by translators who are activists who just volunteer to translate from all over the world. We have translations to Hebrew and Arabic and French and Portuguese and so many other languages.
Yeah.
It's amazing. We actually wanted to turn this into a longer-term effort, into an organization that highlights the intersectionality of the climate crisis, that highlights the need to look at how water and oceans affect the world and how we affect the oceans, and how food security affects communities, and how we can improve food security and fashion. And we even did a pollinators week, and we've done so many different themes because we believe that the climate crisis is not a single issue thing. It's something that touches everything. And with that, you can touch more people and you can invite more people to be part of the solutions. So that was our Earth Day campaign. And we have had several other campaigns. And Joseph is going to tell you a little bit of our voting campaign.
Yeah, so we started the voting campaign about a few weeks before the election. This was the first time I was able to vote and use my voice in the political party, and that was definitely what influenced us going into it, thinking about what we could do to also support as well as encourage people to go out to the polls and use their votes. Because we found that there was a lot of people out there who didn't, and they ended up not doing that. And in the last election, they skipped voting because they didn't like the politicians that were running, and they didn't like the elects. And we want to push that it's not about the politicians that you want. You have to look at the issues and then see how certain politicians are going to help certain issues that you want to focus on. And we did that through posts. We did that through a webinar. We had a few interviews with a few politicians. I was invited to speak for my senator as well as for my congresswoman, which was absolutely awesome. I put out the word for Re-Earth, just talking about all about how youth within the different districts of New York could actually get involved, how they could volunteer, especially during COVID, because those are first online workers that we were talking about, and how we have to support those people because during the voting, they're overlooked as just like a essential for the election, but they are there on their own time, not being paid or being paid very little. So we also had to do a lot of focus and be appreciative of that. So all of those things together kind of formed into this thing that we push out as connection to the environmental and racial justice. She's going to go into about a racial justice campaign that we did, but all of our campaigns kind of affect each other because we are a organization that focuses on this huge cycle of not being a single issue, but being all these issues being affected. So when we look at like a certain week or when we look at a certain issue, it's because it affects other issues we already talked about because everything is connected in some way. And that's also something that we take into account when we choose the themes and choose what themes are coming after the others. So racial justice.
Yeah, and something that I would like to add really quickly to the voting campaign is that, as mentioned before, our organization is global. So we don't usually like to focus on specific countries, but we do believe that the US election affected the whole world. So it was a kind of global effort. We wanted to bring voices from other parts of the world to tell US voters that if they could vote in the US election, they would vote for climate and for our future. And as somebody who's not a US citizen, I can't vote. I've lived here for 5 years and I am extremely politically involved. Seeing that I couldn't have that power to push out my voice in an election is a little like, it gives you a little bit of anxiety to not be able to actually kind of vote for what you want to see. But I feel like that also inspired a lot of people to vote because we ask people to vote for those who can't. And Re-Earth being extremely diverse and inclusive, there's a lot of youth who are immigrants and youth who, their parents can't vote or their parents don't know how to vote or they don't know English, so they don't understand the system. So there were a lot of efforts for that as well.
Yeah.
And for our racial justice campaign, this really stemmed out of the Black Lives Matter movement that happened over the summer in the US and around the world. Like one of the climate organizations that I worked with before said, we don't want to do anything. We don't want to push any climate stuff out right now because we don't want to shadow the Black Lives Matter movement. And when I saw that, I realized that there was this disconnect between the actual impacts of the climate crisis and how it's understood to affect Black and Brown communities. So it was our goal to push out the fact that environmental racism is a thing and that Black and Brown communities are the most affected by pollution, by the siting of noxious facilities, by air pollution and water pollution. And Indigenous communities are extremely affected, are displaced by pipelines and by the fracking industry. So there's a huge connect between the communities who are targeted, not only affected, but targeted by all these industries and the bigger theme of structural racism. So we wanted to add to the conversation and say climate justice is social justice. And when you fight for environmental rights, you are fighting for people, and you're fighting for people who historically have been disenfranchised and historically have been neglected and historically have been targeted. And that was the point of our racial justice campaign, to inform people that the climate movement is about equality, is about racial justice, gender justice, and like intergenerational justice. So it's about so many things interconnecting. And so that was something that was really special to us. And we had a social justice task force that came up with a lot of the material that we put out. And it was super amazing because structurally Re-Earth also went through a period of educating each other. We had a lot of people who thought that racism only happened in the US, and they realized that racism is present all over the world, and there is something that we need to tackle globally. It's not only something that happens in specific countries, but it's something that in my own country, in Mexico, people don't even realize that they're being racist sometimes. So you have to show people that it is happening and that we have to be anti-racist continuously.
Anyone could really start an organization. I think there were definitely examples of that as well. We both started, well, of course, she was definitely one of the key factors for Re-Earth actually coming together.
You too. You did all the
yes, but when we look back on it and seeing that our first post only had 12 likes, all 12 from the core members. Anything that you really start and you really believe in and have a why to why you're doing it, people will actually see that and notice that through the screen or through whatever type of way that you're trying to push out this message. I think that we definitely want to encourage people to really go out there and start anything they want. If it's just a campaign, if it's a grassroots effort, anything that you really put your mind to, people are going to notice that and are actually going to start supporting you. And
if you are an environmentalist, you have to not only look at conservation and parks and polar bears, but you have to look at people's lives and people's quality of life and the air we breathe and the water we drink and our children's future.
Xiye and Joseph. Welcome, and thank you both for being with us today.
Thank you for having us.
thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the presentation and for sharing your story with us. Both of you have really stepped up to affect change in the environment and really to do something about climate challenge. To be honest, I don't think I was thinking about renewable energy or pollution when I was in high school. So I truly commend you for all that you've done and really to keep up with this. And to everyone who's watching live today, thank you for joining us. And I'm sure you're as awed as I am with everything that both Xiye and Joseph have done. And I'm sure you have a lot of questions already. I see some of the questions already in the comments. So please join us during the Q&A section by writing your name, where you're joining us from, and state your question. And I will be asking Xiye and Joseph throughout our extended Q&A segment today. So I will start us off. Xiye, what you said in the beginning of the presentation really stuck with me. You mentioned something along the lines of our relationship with Mother Earth is reciprocal, that as we receive, we need to give. And there's definitely an urgency to helping the Earth. As you know, as you put it, we couldn't wait to grow up to do something. What do you think are the top 3 things that need to happen in order to slow or reverse climate change?
Thank you for the question. And, I've thought about this for a while because people always want to know the first 3 things they can do or the first 10 things they can do. And so my advice is the first thing we have to do is change our mindset, because I truly believe that climate activism and being part of the climate fight and climate justice is not only about the choices that we make, as much as it is about how we think about the world. So if we think in a regenerative way, in an ecological way, in a way that is going to help the planet at the end of the day, that is going to guide all of our decisions. So that's my first point, like change your mindset to one of, we need to help Mother Earth, because she has been doing that for us for so long. The second thing is to always be intersectional, especially the climate movement. I don't want it to be seen as it's only about renewable energy, it's only about straws, it's only about polar bears. I want it to be seen as it's for us, for our futures, for our presents, to respect our pasts, it's for our dignity, it's for our right to have joy, our right to live our best lives. And climate justice means that. It means kind of learning from all of our mistakes that we've had and channeling our innovation and our creativity for a better world, a world where, Joseph and I are not afraid to have kids, And the last thing is take care of yourselves. Being in the environmental movement at any capacity can be exhausting, mentally and physically, because you're constantly thinking of what policy did pass, what policy didn't pass, how that's going to affect the future, what classes you should take. Like, I know Joseph and I have our own interests, but at the end of the day, we're both studying environmental stuff. And our whole lives as of now are having an NGO, which is really fun. And we do, have a great community, but it shouldn't get to the point where you are exhausting yourself. So that's why I think that self-care is super important.
Thank you for that. And I did jump into the tough question right away, but I should preface by asking the simple question, which is, I think everyone knows that you're in school, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you're studying, both you and Joseph.
Yeah, of course. So I'm a freshman. We're both freshmen. I'm a freshman at the University of Pennsylvania, studying environmental studies with a concentration in policy and international relations, and an intended minor in environmental. I forgot, environmental management. I even forget the name. But yeah, I'm basically interested. My goal is to be able to walk into any room and have a smart and constructive conversation on whatever is going on, whether that be policy or business. And just be able to put my point of view as an environmental activist.
I'm on a little bit of a different track. So I'm, again, a freshman. I study at Skidmore College up in Saratoga Springs. And right now, my two majors are quantum physics and international business. And then I have a minor in economics. So it's kind of a weird two majors. Usually I get a lot of questions about it with the quantum physics, and then you mix it with business, but it actually works perfectly, because when you talk about sustainable engineering and about how physics kind of falls into business, it kind of works into this beautiful thing that Skidmore allowed me to build my own major. So that's kind of a starting conversation point.
Oh, that's very impressive, both of you. What are your plans post-college? I mean, you're a freshman, but in a couple of years down the road, what do you have? Have you thought about what you are going to do? Are you going to continue with the movement? Talk to us a little bit more about that.
I mean, I think that we are never stopping the movement. Even now that we are students, and it takes a lot of effort to be a full-time student during a pandemic, we are still going all out with Re-Earth Initiative. We're now in a process of restructuring. So we are conducting interviews this week for core team positions. We got after over 85 applications. We're interviewing 25 people this week. So we're always moving and we're always continuing. And our goal for Re-Earth Initiative is to be able to make all of our positions paid positions for youth, because our work often does go unappreciated and undervalued. So we just want to make our organization stronger and more inclusive, more inviting, always working on that aspect that makes us who we are.
Yeah, I think also jumping off of that, especially with Re-Earth and how well it's done in a year, we kind of want to see where it's going to go in the next few years. And we have volunteers that are 25, 30 that are still applying to become core members. And we're also, one of our stances is to be multi-generational. And I think that's going to continue down the line still when we move into like the next few years. And then hopefully after college, we're both able to still work together. I'm hoping to go back to New York City. And I also think that Xiye is going to end up there because she's there now. So continue doing that. And then we kind of have to see where where college is going to take us, because Right now, I think it's great that is able to both balance Re-Earth and then on top of that balance school. So I think that could also move into balancing work in some sense and then balancing Re-Earth as well. So we just have to see how much how much that we could handle the next few years. So
well, we still have a few more years to get to that point. Let's talk a little bit about Re-Earth. As you just brought it up, it has so many facets and so many campaigns, and so much is connected. It, from an outside looking in, I'm thinking, wow, it must be overwhelming, to know where to start. So talk to us about how you select or how you focus on certain topics.
So we started with the We the Planet campaign that kind of moved into Re-Earth, and basically we asked people to submit 2 pledges. And that is really kind of where we started, because you could kind of delve into different areas of the environmental world, an environmental community, an activist community, that you could place those into certain weeks. So we went through the pledges because, number one, we wanted to help with education and help students actually understand what the pledges could actually mean, and down the road what it could actually lead to. So that's kind of where we started. We kind of looked through the list, and we had over 20,000 submissions at the end of the day that we actually had to look through. And then we kind of chose our weeks and our campaigns based on that information, because Re-Earth is made up mostly of volunteers and the followers, and we're just 9 of the core members. So we have to also take into account the information and the wants that everyone else wanted to learn about. And then that's basically where we started. So.
Yeah, I'm building off of that really quickly. Is we're also really socially responsive. So I think that whatever is going on that we think is important, like Black Lives Matter, like the Escazú agreement, we jump on it and make a whole campaign out of it, even if it wasn't on our schedule, just because that's how we want other bodies to act. We want them to be socially responsive to the moment, to the needs, to different crises that are going on.
Absolutely. And, during the presentation, you mentioned about the Black Lives Matter, and you also mentioned how the climate movement is really about justice, and it just shows that everything is really interconnected. These are big, big issues to tackle. You mentioned earlier, I'm lost for words, because really, even the adults are having a hard time, dealing with all of these issues. And so you mentioned also about self-care earlier, because you said it can be overwhelming, it can be tiring, it can be exhausting. Talk to us a little bit about that. How do you do self-care? How do you make sure that you're not too exhausted, you're not too overwhelmed when you're tackling not only climate movement, but also social justice and other big issues that are happening in our world?
Yeah, so I think that self-care looks differently for everyone, but for me personally is about really having boundaries, and that's something that I've had to learn with time, because at the beginning of my activism, I was so excited about everything that was going on, and so I would say yes to everything. If somebody needed me for whatever event, I would be there. I would say yes. Or if somebody needed me to organize the whole school for a strike, I would do that. And then on top of that, I would be doing school and trying to do gymnastics, which I don't do anymore, and applying to college. So for me, it was really exhausting. I don't remember if I mentioned this on the presentation, but there was a time where I did end up with heart palpitations because I was really stressed. And I feel like I'm kind of grateful that happened at the beginning of my activism, because it taught me to never get to that point ever again. So it's about setting boundaries most importantly, but also having a schedule, giving yourself time to eat well, sleep well, all of the things that we take for granted a lot of the time, especially as college students. You feel like you're invincible and you can just pull all-nighters all the time. But it is really important to not do that, to keep yourself refreshed. And the last, but I feel like one of the most important things as well, is community. So we really make it a really big point in Re-Earth's initiative to be a community for all the members. And now that our team is expanding to over 20 core members, We want that to feel like a family. We want that to be a supportive space, and we want that to be, even if it's a small family, we want it to be a family, so that we all feel supported in this work.
Definitely supporting each other is important. And I think I saw that through your social media presence and postings. It is one big family, and you guys are supporting each other in this work. So kudos to you. What about you, Joseph?
So I think especially for me, like I'm always grateful for living in New York City, and she and I both met freshman year of high school, so we kind of had each other throughout the process, and then Earth was kind of our last year in high school, moving into college. But I was working at a hospital for most of my time in New York City since sophomore year. So when you talk about becoming an activist and then also having a job after school and then all of that on top, it did get very stressful. So when Xiye talked about boundaries, that totally makes sense. I really delve into the food aspect of it. So I would always treat myself to some good food. I always feel like that's like the best way to kind of relieve some stress. And then of course having friends such as Xiye, and then having that type of connection, relationship, and understanding that you're able to delve into what you're really feeling and needing to take a break, and always expressing that to other people always helps. And then also just, I know it gets a lot stressful for everyone. It seems like the world has so many more problems and solutions, and that's what we're all working towards. But I think the why of why we're doing this, especially for Xiye and I, and then for other people, there's different stages, of course, of why we're doing it. Some people are being affected firsthand. There was a flood. They have to rebuild their home, and then some people are watching from afar. But this is a collective movement, and we especially see that with Re-Earth, and so many people wanting to join from so many different backgrounds. That kind of gives me some hope. And even though that I sometimes have to take a break or a step back, there's other people to fill my shoes in the time, and do the things that I do, because so many people are talented in this community, and there's so many different people that have different qualities that makes it into amazing like actual effort. So that kind of keeps me going, even though there's some hard days. So
Well, those are great suggestions and great points. I wanted to get into some of the questions that we have already received. One is from Viola in Poland. She was asking, what would you say to people who are not accepting the climate crisis, who say that issues related to climate change, like extreme weather conditions or food shortages, don't have an impact in their daily life?
I think we definitely knew that when we started Re-Earth Initiative that we were going to get some pushback, and we definitely started seeing that immediately when we started putting out our own ideals. And we try to stay non-biased on many issues, especially when it comes to political issues, because we're here as an environmental and educational platform. We're not here to be biased in any way in a political form, and especially if this was my first year voting, so it was definitely an important factor in when you talk about what's happening in the United States and how that's going to affect the rest of the world. And I definitely have received some emails saying like, what you're doing does not make sense, climate change is not real, and that type of thing. And you kind of just have to, I'm really science-based, and that's usually, we have another core member that is going for a PhD on, she's doing all these amazing things in the science world, and listening to her and understanding the actual 1% change, and when we talk about climate change and how that's affecting the rest of the world, and then you see California and different places starting to have an increase in global change, you can't, especially with closed-minded people, it's very hard to kind of reverse the fact that they don't believe into it, but you really do have to find some middle ground. So I usually like to have conversations. I think conversations is the biggest thing that you could have, and having a one-on-one is basically the way that I do it. So I'm never opposed to have a Zoom call with a person that does not believe in what I'm doing, because you're able to find some connections and where they're seeing something that's changing in their own life. And then you kind of move into saying, we don't need to like agree on everything, but we could agree on these points. And that kind of helps them open up to a little bit of what we're doing. And I think Xiye could definitely talk a lot about that as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, I really admire that Joseph still has the heart to have one-on-one conversations. For me, that was kind of too much at some point. And I realized that it is important to have one-on-ones when people have an open mind, but you are gonna get infinite amount of people who put down your work, and in any field. So I think the most important thing is not to give your time and energy to people who are gonna bring you down, because our biggest problem is not actually climate denialism, it's climate apathy. People who know what's going on, but they don't do anything about it. The corporations that know the damage they're doing, but they don't do anything about it. A lot of our parents who saw this unfold in their lifetimes and don't know where to start. So I think that those are the people who we have to put our energy towards. People who are in the brink of activism, in the brink of changing their lifestyle, on the brink of being parents who can educate really mindful children. So that's where I put most of my energy towards. If you confront somebody who puts your work down, just keep going, because history will go down. And when we look back, we're going to know exactly who was there to actually do the work. And the people who were countering that, we are more powerful if we don't give them the attention that they crave, and we just do our work.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Both of you are wise beyond your years. And I have another question here that's sort of related. This is from Antonius from Chicago. He's asking, do you have a method of researching and preparing materials to educate yourselves and others? And I'm sure some of this go in handy, especially if you're talking to people who do not believe in climate change, or people who are climate apathy, like you mentioned, Xiye.
Yeah, I mean, I know Joseph will have a lot to say about this, but personally, I try to read every single day or absorb some kind of new information every day. And I try to choose at least 1 or 2 classes in my curriculum that have to do with the environment. So right now I'm taking a environmental economics class, and I'm also taking a physics class on oil and renewable energy. So for me, it's, like I said before, really about being able to have actual conversations with people who are experts on those fields and understanding those conversations. And that's how your brain needs to be fed with information constantly to be able to understand something fully. So it's not about taking a one-on-one class, a climate one-on-one class one time, and then you're good to go. I think it's about nourishing our brain and our innate want for information and understanding of the world. And the more you deepen your understanding of the climate crisis and its intersectionalities, the more you can be part of different solutions, and the more you can see how different solutions intersect and how one can be like ultimately a solution for many issues.
So it's kind of like a weird thing, but one of the best things that really came out of coronavirus and Zoom starting to become a thing of daily lives is that I was watching a lot of forums and different presentations online about climate change. And one of my biggest things is that I never, again, when it comes to being biased, I never just watch one side of it. If we're talking about oil or gas, I always go to conservative sides about it as well and understand where they're coming from and try to understand their worries about switching to renewable energy or switching to different methods of getting energy as well. So I think the biggest thing that I do is I try to watch different forums that are online. And I know that Harvard has some for free as well, and you're able to take classes online for free. So I do that in my spare time, especially when I'm in points of my life where I don't have a lot of work, or during the summer, a lot of times I also watch those as well. I try to read as many of the environmental newsletters as I can, and there's a lot of different NGOs I really focus on. Polluters Out, for one, is definitely one that I definitely try to read up about their newsletters and what they send out. And then a lot of the information that I also get is sent to me. Funny enough, when I started my LinkedIn, a lot of these different academics were sending me articles that I was starting to read, and I kind of looked through that and I was like, this is actually a very interesting point, and then delved into that. So it's usually starting points that they send me to focus on, and then I kind of read up about it later that week. And so I try to, as Xiye said, you feed the mind constantly. And then there's also times where I need a break from it because it is a lot of information. So you switch to a movie on Netflix. And then another thing that's great is that Re-Earth does get a lot of invitations to environmentalist movies and series that are being sent out. So we try to watch those as a family together online. So that's also another place where I get my information.
Well, it's definitely good what you're doing in terms of try to walk a mile in their shoes, try to understand their perspectives, because I think that's when the dialogue can happen and change can work for a lot of people. So you're definitely doing the right thing. I have a question here from Gosha, tuning in from Turkey. She's asking, what advice do you have for young people who have not grown up within as environmentally conscious families and communities as you have? Are there specific literature or resources that you would recommend for them to start with?
So I think Xiye could definitely talk all about her family. My family is not that environmentally driven at all, which is very funny. The place that I really got it was school. So my school is very progressive in that sense, and Xiye kind of, through all of her actions at school and setting up these huge protests, really drew me into actually becoming an activist. And I also started it from work as well, seeing racial justice and the different levels of privilege in New York, especially at a hospital. You really see like the effect of climate change, especially when Hurricane Sandy hit. So that's kind of what drew me into it. And it wasn't so much my family or my background. It was more seeing that I had privilege and I had a voice in this discussion and I could use it for other people. And that, of course, takes experience. And I'm not saying that I have a lot of it, but it kind of took me some time to like actually get self-started. But I think the biggest research that I had, especially with us, is social media. I know that there's a double-edged sword when you talk about, double-edged blade when we talk about social media, especially when there's fake news and other things like that. But there's also great resources online that a lot of students are able to use. And I also had a great friend like Xiye to introduce me to great resources that I could focus on, and her being a great resource as general, and then really teaching me the best things that I could bring. And also every people have different experience and different qualities that they're able to bring to the discussion. And I kind of figured that out later into actually understanding why I was becoming an activist as well. So.
Yeah, and I mean, oh, sorry, I just dropped my cup. I think that advice I would give to young people who don't know where to start. First of all, if you're here, if you're watching this, you already started. So I think that that also needs to be pointed out, that just curiosity, just asking questions is already starting, and it will lead you to the place where you want to be. My biggest advice is to pick whatever you care about, whether that's art or business or economics or animals. Pick whatever you care about and find the intersection with climate, because I think that a lot of the times we underestimate the power that intersectionality can have. Now I know a lot of climate psychologists, which I think is super cool. I know a lot of environmental lawyers, people who write climate policy, people who work in the energy sector with renewable energy. So you really start to realize that every field has an environmental lens. So I don't think you should change who you are to be part of this. We need you to be who you are so that this is the most complete movement it can be.
Well, Joseph did mention that you can do anything that you put your mind into during the taped presentation. So that's definitely ringing true. And you know what you just said, Xiye, about stay true to yourself, because then this movement will be complete, because we're really attacking it from so many different areas and interest, and everything is interconnected. So I wanted to thank you both so much for your time and sharing your passion in climate activism. You're really showing that anyone, regardless whether they're young or they're old, anyone can play a role in caring for the earth and for each other. And truly, I think we are lucky to have you as young leaders who are really, doing your best and moving the needle in terms of climate activism. And I wish you guys much, much success, and really keep up the excellent work.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was truly inspirational. Do you have an idea to share with us about personal development or taking care of our environment or of each other? If you do, please email us your idea at connects@greenheart.org. We would love to hear from you and potentially feature you on an upcoming Greenheart Connects episode or highlight you on our social media channels. There's so much that I've learned today. Thanks to Xiye and Joseph for joining us, and thanks to all of you who participated and asked questions. Join us on Thursday, February 18th, 2021 at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time when we talk with former U.S. Ambassador to Georgia, Ian Kelly, and Rich Zaccaroli about the importance of activism and serving your community. Your civic activism matters. It leads to global conversations, governments and corporations listen, and change can happen. We think you'll be inspired. You are here because you want to learn about ways to care for our planet and for each other. Thank you so much for your commitment. Please note that there's a discount for quarterly subscriptions to Greenheart Connects. You can learn more by going to greenheartconnects.org. Later today, this full episode will be available online. As a member, you could also see past episodes to watch other inspirational speakers and engaging topics. Be sure to check out the resources page for more information that has been shared by our speakers. And finally, please join us on our social media channels to continue the conversation and to support each other, and to share what you are doing to make the world a better place. We hope to see you here again on February 18, 2021 for our next Greenheart Connects. Thank you.